Welcome back to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Joining us for the second half of our show is Ken Ono, professor of mathematics and computer science at Emory University and the author of My Search for Ramanujan. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bill. It's wonderful to be here.
Ken, I think this is the first time we've had a number theorist on the show, which means our challenge is to make all the brain power you exude intelligible. I asked you on because the PR person for the talent initiative you launched reached out to us with an inspiring story. It's about the quest you've embarked on to find hidden genius. I understand your own work as a mathematician was inspired by the life of Srinivasa Ramanujan, who I knew very little about until yesterday when I went to the movies to watch The Man Who Knew Infinity. It was a very moving film, which you served on as an associate producer and mathematical consultant. Give us a synopsis of the life of this towering genius.
So Ramanujan is an amazing figure, and one of the reasons that I am so proud of this film is it's our opportunity to help make Ramanujan a household name. This film stars Jeremy Irons as a British professor, Hardy, and Dev Patel as Ramanujan. Who was Ramanujan? I'd like to remind you, this is absolutely a true story. He was an Indian who was born in a small village in South India at the end of the 19th century, at a time when India was under British colonial rule. It was a very difficult time to be an Indian. He was a two-time college dropout. Mathematics came to him as visions from his goddess. His single devotion in life was to find formulas that he recorded in notebooks, and he was almost lost to the world. He had some support from friends and family, and he ended up writing a letter to this distinguished professor at Cambridge University who didn't ignore this two-time college dropout. He saw genius in 7 or 8 pages of formulas, and Hardy invited this Indian to come study at Cambridge, and the film and Ramanujan's legacy is largely based on the collaboration between these two very different men.
Was that invitation uncharacteristic for the times?
Sure. Keep in mind that, Ramanujan was an Indian. There was a lot of racism at the time, and Hardy was a leader of the British academic community. It would have been completely unexpected for an Indian to receive an invitation from one of the world's greatest mathematicians. That just didn't happen.
What do you make of Ramanujan's belief that his mathematical truths came to him as visions sent from this Hindu goddess?
You can take that on many different levels, but at the end of the day, Ramanujan was not trained in the formal methods of science and math. And so, as a devout Hindu, as everyone around him was, his mother actually sang in the local temple for work, it doesn't come as a surprise that he believed that his ideas came as visions from a goddess, his family goddess. And, at the end of the day, in terms of aha moments, people who think about deep theories, sometimes you can ponder a problem or ponder ideas for days, months, perhaps even years, and then at some point there's that moment of inspiration where you come up with a big breakthrough. I don't know how to describe that, except to say that there's a lot of mysticism when those moments happen. And, who are we to question whether that's divine in origin or not?
You mentioned the aha moment. How did you help the filmmakers capture that? Because it certainly came through.
Oh, this is actually very difficult. Both Jeremy and Dev, they were worried about playing mathematicians because they'll both tell you they're not very good at math. And so the director, Matt Brown, he flew me over to Pinewood Studios, and we rehearsed. There were several days where it was just the four of us with the director and Dev and Jeremy going over the lines, reworking the script, and we even had a little chalkboard where we practiced how mathematicians stand in front of a board. And so that was a lot of work. I can't say that I gave them any tips other than to say, this is what I look like when I give a lecture to audiences about mathematics, and do your best to emulate that.
Kudos on capturing the excitement of it all.
Thank you.
What role does beauty, elegance, and majesty play in mathematics?
Well, good mathematics should be beautiful. I'm glad you asked that question because most people who don't love mathematics already are probably inclined to not like mathematics or say they're not good at mathematics. And the reality is that the mathematics one learns in high school and much of college, that's really just rote calculation. It's meant to be a chore. But for those of us who think about ideas, we like to think of mathematics in terms of flights of fancy, much like an artist or a musician would describe their trade. There are beautiful proofs. Formulas should be beautiful. And, nature can be described in terms of mathematics. And it's in that way that we should be thinking of mathematics as a work of art. And if you don't have the time to learn the language of mathematics, I hope people can appreciate that that's what Ramanujan and Hardy shared. They viewed their work as art, and for them, the ideas were beautiful.
Ken, as a trained engineer, I was always perplexed by you pure mathematicians. In grad school, we were using Fourier transforms to design complex communication systems, while you guys were taking 2 days to prove that 3 was an odd number.
Maybe 3 seconds to do that one.
Not in the course I took. It took us 3 days. What is it about the nature of intellectual rigor that drives mathematicians and apparently vexed Ramanujan?
Ramanujan was a gifted, probably one of the world's most gifted ever, a producer of brilliant ideas. But ideas often can start out as little more than wishful thinking. And where do you need the intellectual rigor? You need the intellectual rigor to turn that idea into a proof. And if you're unable to prove that idea, maybe it's not even right. And Ramanujan, as a young student at Cambridge, didn't understand that great ideas might not always be so great.
Ken, you took a circuitous path to higher mathematics. I understand your father was a celebrated mathematician at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, and your mother was a classic Japanese tiger mom. Yet you were a high school dropout who hated math. Tell us about that journey.
So my father spent most of his career at Johns Hopkins, but he was discovered shortly after World War II by a distinguished professor who was at the Institute for Advanced Study, and he arranged for a visit, an intellectual sabbatical type of visit to Princeton. What was supposed to be a 3-month visit to Princeton turned out to be a lifetime, and my parents, who I love, raised 3 boys in a country that they knew nothing about. In fact, they raised them in the United States, a country that they were taught to despise as children raised during World War II.
Sure.
And so imagine how difficult it was for them to raise a family in a country that didn't embrace them when they first landed here, right? Memories of Pearl Harbor were fresh, and so it was very difficult for them, very much like you could imagine Ramanujan struggling in England when he first arrived. So my parents, they believed that as boys, our success would depend on our academic prowess. We were supposed to be conquerors of our fields, brilliant mathematicians, and in the case of my oldest brother, a brilliant musician. As the youngest of 3, I was expected to be a mathematician raised in the image of my father, and that meant that I was supposed to get perfect test scores. I was supposed to be someone who was going to go to a Harvard or Princeton and ultimately become a distinguished professor. And what that meant was, as early as 1st and 2nd grade, I was supposed to do math problems, do geometry proofs, sitting next to my dad during the summers while everyone else my age was out playing and so on and so forth.
The pressures must have been enormous.
Terrible. I spent 3 decades of my life coming to grips with that upbringing. And so I hated math because I'd never taken the time to think about what my parents were doing in terms of trying to raise us. They were raising us the best way that they knew how, given their circumstances. And I didn't understand any of that at all.
So how did Ramanujan inspire you?
It was in 10th grade, 1984. I was about to just quit high school. I thought I was going to run away, maybe not even ever see my parents again, when a letter came to the house from India. It was a letter from Ramanujan's widow, and I'd never heard of Ramanujan before. I pulled the letter out of the mailbox, gave it to my dad, and a couple hours later, he comes to me in tears, and he told me that he had to tell me a most amazing story about this man who had died over 60 years earlier, Ramanujan. And what the letter was, and I have it, my dad gave it to me, it's one of my most prized possessions now because of the role this letter plays in my life. The letter was just a thank you note from Ramanujan's widow thanking him for a small gift that he made that helped pay for a bust of Ramanujan, a sculpture. So my dad tells me about a 2-time college dropout who had inspired him. And wow, I mean, that talk about an amazing moment. I needed to hear that my parents could look up to a 2-time college dropout. I needed to learn there that there could be a path for me that didn't require being a straight A student or, someone who had to get perfect SAT scores. And that was important to me.
Just as Ramanujan had G.H. Hardy to take him under his wing, I understand you had an important mentor in your life.
Well, my parents taught me how to work hard, and they taught me how to have high standards. They didn't teach me to love math. And that was what I needed from my mentors in college and graduate school. There was a professor by the name of Paul Sally. He was a very tall man. He had an eye patch. We called him the pirate professor. He was a legend at the University of Chicago. He helped me out in college. And later, my PhD advisor, Basil Gordon, he turned me on to math as something that you could love. My relationship with him was wonderful. He knew that I was pretty jaded when I started graduate school. I thought like a child when I started graduate school, and I thought that success all still depended on grades. And for the first few months, instead of talking about math, we would talk about poetry, we listened to music, we went for walks on the beach. And he said that math is hard, but you're only going to succeed if you can begin to see the beauty in it. And he recognized that I didn't really see beauty in much of anything. I thought doing well in school was, how could you get the best grades by, putting forth the least amount of effort? And he broke me of that. And finally, I had a world-class postdoctoral mentor. His name is Andrew Granville, who was actually Cambridge trained. He's British. And he taught me how to be a professional mathematician. Without any of these men, there would have been no way that I could have succeeded. So mentorship was absolutely critical for my success.
Pardon me for bringing up a painful subject, but I understand that at one point you attempted to take your own life.
That's right. This is a very difficult period of my life because I was 24 years old and I had been working very hard on my thesis. I'd finally found a subject that I was passionate about, and I wasn't worrying about whether the world would care about my theorems. So I put forth my best effort, and I gave some lectures at conferences, and it didn't work out so well for me. I still had a lot to learn, and in a moment of despair at a conference where I was hoping to be noticed by some world leaders in my area, turned out they basically ignored me. I hadn't earned their respect, but it turns out that one of my friends from graduate school was like the star of the conference, and it was very difficult for me to deal with. And, I almost drove myself in my car, my little Hyundai XL, headlong into a logging truck on a highway driving in the opposite direction.
Oh, boy.
So it's not mental illness. It was just one of those moments where you think that you have no future. It's never happened to me before or since, but if you sink your heart into something and are rejected, it takes a lot of strength to fight back, and I almost didn't have that. So I'm glad I wasn't successful. I don't think I was actually brave enough to pull it off, I think. And I recently wrote a book called My Search for Ramanujan, not because I want to tell the story of Ramanujan alone. I wanted to talk about how all successful people have to be happy, but, it's a long journey, and there are lots of forks in the roads. There are a lot of low points and very high points. For me, this conference in Montana in 1992 where I tried to kill myself is by far the lowest point of my life. And as a professor at Emory and an advisor of PhD students, I wanted to tell my story about these weaknesses, my struggles, because you need to hear about overcoming difficulty, and students need to hear that. And I don't know, maybe we'll get an opportunity to talk about the challenges of education today.
I'd like to move on to that. Ken, it all worked out for you in the end. You actually put in your own time at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. And now you've launched something called the Spirit of Ramanujan Math Talent Initiative. With the help of Emory University and the Templeton World Charity Foundation, it looks like you're off to a great start. What are your goals?
Well, so what do we have in Ramanujan? We have this incredible story of a passionate young student who overcomes an almost impossible disadvantages. So what we want to do in the Spirit of Ramanujan is we want to seek the outliers. We want to show that greatness can be found in the most unpromising of circumstances. And what our goal is to find these talents, these outliers, and provide and nurture them, just like Hardy nurtured Ramanujan. And so in the Spirit of Ramanujan, we have a competition where we're going to invite anyone in the world to apply for one of 30 Templeton World Charity Foundation Ramanujan prizes. And these will be prizes that will help support travel to conferences. They'll help support, research or help people to connect with experts in various academic disciplines. And so, what are we reacting to? We're reacting to the fact that we presently live in everywhere in the world, education is quite inelastic. You hear a lot about not enough funding for schools or teacher burnout or lack of resources. These are all very serious problems, and what we want to do in this effort is to help the outliers, the people that are easily lost.
With all the attention and public funding we provide to what are nowadays called the differently abled, why do we seem to not only neglect but even stifle those rare individuals with extraordinary capabilities?
Well, these very rare people are so rare that, and I understand why this is done. Public funding really is about educating all people. We're not leaving anyone behind. Finding the Ramanujans, they're very hard to find. Let's face it, had Ramanujan not reached out to Hardy, he probably would have never been discovered. It takes an expert to recognize someone of Ramanujan's talent who had a difficult time communicating his ideas to anyone around him. And so, that's why I think our Spirit of Ramanujan initiative goes some way towards finding them. By the way, we've already found an incredible 12-year-old boy in Qatar who happens to be of Indian descent, so it's already working out. And what we would like to do is play the role of Hardy and connect experts in science with those who desperately want to find and make those connections.
Well, you've got the internet now to break through anywhere in the world. Anyone with a smartphone can now reach to you. But
that's right.
What does a conventional public education do to these potential math prodigies?
Well, if you're a 10-year-old boy that already knows, calculus, for example, because they're reading these books online, and you live in a community where they might not even teach calculus in high school, or there might not even be a high school or a college around. The internet can only go so far. You really need to talk to people who can help mentor and provide opportunities for the future. So the internet, smartphones, that's a first step, but nothing really replaces the role of having an actual person who takes great care and pride in developing future talent.
Or at least someone who could show you the beauty.
Or at least someone who can show you the beauty. Actually, that is one problem with the internet. Because information is so readily accessible, you can often mistake talent for just ease of access of information. Science usually proceeds by the work of thousands, right? Slowly modifying and adding to a body of knowledge. But every once in a while, we get these fireballs who come along that propel, human knowledge forward. We have people like Ramanujan, Tesla, Einstein. How do we find the next generation? Because presently we live at a time where we need science more than we've ever needed science before.
Our culture celebrates athletic prowess from a very early age, yet often seems fearful or resentful of intellectual prowess. Why do you figure that?
Well, if you're not good at running, you don't get poor grades in school, then, right? But if you struggle in a math class in high school, you're not going to enjoy getting poor grades, and people don't tend to like things that they don't think that they're good at. By the way, the math that we teach in high school is very different from the math that I'm talking about here.
Sure.
Some of my best students did very poorly on standardized tests, and now they're professors at elite universities all over the country. So just like you could be a talented marathon runner but a very poor sprinter, there's genius and talent in many different ways in math and in all subjects. It just so happens that most people think of math as solving numbers 1 through 51 odd in terms of the quadratic equation. And if that's what your image of math is, well, I don't like that either.
Ken, what advice would you give to parents of precocious children who might harbor extraordinary capabilities?
That's a difficult one. You know, you always love your kids. And if your child has unusual talent, do your best to support them, even if these are talents in areas you don't know well, and seek help. You know, Ramanujan, as a 2-time college dropout, had support of his parents, and instead of being reprimanded for that, he ended up having the strength and self-confidence to write a Hardy. So if you have a child that exhibits unusual talent in one skill and maybe not others, do your best to seek that help. If it's in math, contact me. Have them participate in our Spirit of Ramanujan initiative. The website is www.expii.com/Ramanujan.
Ken, thanks so much for coming on the show, sharing your stories and Ramanujan's.
Thank you very much, Bill.
That was Ken Ono, professor of mathematics and computer science at Emory University and the author of My Search for Ramanujan, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. And while you're at it, take a look at realclearmarkets.com, my go-to place for diverse views on political economics. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a boutique property management company in Boston's South End. Visit them online at oldbostonrestorations.com. That wraps up our show for this week. Please join us next week, same time, same station. See you then.